Greetings. I am Lucia Pavone, and today's topic is mutual aid. Explored through the readings and podcasts for weeks 12 and 13. Please keep in mind, how does mutual aid relate to our Women and Money's course? Our question: how do the texts make sense of the complexities and possibilities inherent in visionary and alternative economic systems posed by Amy? So keep that in mind as we move forward. I encourage you to think of the specific examples from our core text. This discussion video is going to be a little bit longer, but there's two very important rich texts that I feel like we should really unpack a little bit. Okay, so in this episode of the Mutual Aid podcast, Amon and Isra explore mutual aid as both a practical strategy and a radical theory, rooted in solidarity, not charity. So Isra defines mutual aid as taking responsibility for our material conditions, not waiting for someone to take care of things for us, organizing, coming from together as individuals in a way that is committed towards the collective, she says. As we move on to the host really stressed that mutual aid is not charity, emphasizing that solidarity and shared responsibility rather than this top-down assistance. So Amon says this is different than charities because charities are a way to launder money, still within the white saviorist model. There is hypocrisy in the charity model. About 15 minutes in, Isra notes that time spent defining mutual aid is often spent trying to show that is not charity. And she reminds the listener that we have erased the origins of charity, a way for the rich to give to the poor to get to heaven. Basically saying, I did wrong, but I paid my dues, so I can still get to heaven. She says capitalism is religious as a whole. Moving on, we're going to look at the historical context quickly. The significance of mutual aid is explored, including the references to the Underground Railroad as being a form of mutual aid, and mutual support systems in marginalized communities. So there's a rich history of mutual aid practices, particularly among oppressed communities, and it serves to highlight its relevance today. The historical content can actually provide valuable lessons for contemporary activism. Amon says about 20 minutes in, this is an intensely political colonial issue. He goes on to say, I think a lot of times when people talk about mutual aid, they talk about anarchism, because anarchism is another one of those things. And if we talk about theory of mutual aid, we're talking about anarchism. Moving on to building communities, mutual aid is described as a way to create networks of support that foster deep community ties and relationships pivotal for resistance against oppressive structures. So mutual aid is not merely about helping others, it is a relational practice that recognizes interdependence in which community members take responsibility for each other's needs. So this perspective really transforms the way people engage with one another, encouraging practices that challenge systemic oppression. It often doubles as direct actions that challenge oppressive systems, positioning mutual aid as both a survival tactic and a statement of defiance. So ultimately, what is mutual aid? Well, the hosts, that is, of mutual aid podcast say it is a tool or a practice that centers the needs of communities that are heavily marginalized by systems of domination that we aim to overthrow. It is choosing to do something now and with what you have and the people that you have, rather than outsourcing and trying to get someone to help you. We're not going to wait around for someone. We're going to figure it out, they say. Moving to Rebecca Solnit's work, Paradise Built in Hell, we uncover profound exploration of human nature during crisis. So Rebecca Solnit powerfully reiterates our understanding of disaster, arguing that in moments of rupture, the true essence of human community often emerges, not in chaos, but in solidarity, rather. So she opens with, who are you? Who are we? Framing identity and relationality as urgent, even life and death matters in times of disaster. So she's not simply is asking like, who are we in calm or controlled conditions, but who we become when the systems develop, when systems we've actually depend on start to break down. So these questions expose how crisis reveals the scaffolding of our societal contracts and whether we see each other as threat or kins. So disasters, far from reducing people to selfish, panicked individuals often reveal a deeper capacity for connection, mutual aid, and joyful collectivity. And she describes the aftermath of King Katrina, and how countless individuals acted with extraordinary generosity, offering food, shelter, rescue, despite the government's failure and the media's portrayal of the survivors as violent threats. And throughout that whole introduction, she emphasizes that beliefs matter. Those who believed that their neighbors were dangerous acted violently or withheld aid to them, while those who shared the humanity rose up and they helped. So Solnit uses the story of Canaan able to frame the foundational ethical questions that arises in every disaster. Do we see each other as threats or kin? And do we act from fear or care? The answer, she argues, is overwhelmingly in favor of care, despite what power structures might want us to believe. She also asks, what is falling together? The phrase falling together in the prelude is a deliberate reversal of the phrase falling apart. She argues that in disaster, things don't just disintegrate. They also cohere in unexpected and beautiful ways. In the absence of structure, many people set up and become their brother's keeper. So forming impromptu communities and care and purpose, on purpose. And the fall here is not the chaos alone, but it's also the deeper, more meaningful human solidarity. It's a kind of grace. Moving on, Solnit is not romanticizing disaster by all means, but she does explore the strange pleasure that arises in its aftermath, that feeling, a mix of immediacy, solidarity, meaningful action. It's not born from suffering, but from the rupture of the normal order and usually suppresses those experiences. So she says we don't even have a language for this emotion, speaking to the absence of a cultural or psychological framework to describe this joyful solidarity. So this makes the work deeply subversive. The question how normal life might actually be what keeps people isolated and anxious and powerless, as we might have seen during the pandemic. So moving on, Solnit refutes the myth that crisis breeds selfish chaos. Instead, disaster sparks solidarity, mutual aid, and even joy, revealing buried urge for connection and agency. She observes the positive emotions that arise in those unpromising circumstances demonstrate that social ties and meaningful work are deeply desired, readily improvised, and intensely rewarding. The very structure of our economy and society prevents these goals from being achieved. Excuse me. And across events from Mexico City to Halifax, people formed a view into another world where friendship and love counted for a lot. Long-term plans and old anxieties for very little, she says. Ultimately, she insists that the prevalent human nature in disaster is resilient, resourceful, generous, empathic, and brave. So Solnit explores how disasters reveal alternative economic systems rooted in care, cooperation, and collective agency. Those moments disrupt capitalist and hierarchical norms and make space for economies of mutual aid that are often marginalized or invisible in daily life. So in 1985, The Mexico City earthquake was a powerful example of this transformation. As you read, after the earthquake devastated Mexico City, killing thousands of people, it was not the government that rushed to help, but ordinary people. Solnit writes, out of the rubble was born the first independent women-led union in recent Mexican history. The earthquake brought out a huge civil society that challenged both the existing institutions and the assumptions about the poor. What emerged was a network of self-organized rescue efforts, food distribution, and political resistance, especially from the poor and working class tenants. She writes that in many arenas, groups began to coalesce, take action, creating citizenry stronger than it had been before. And that these groups, including the damnificados, the newly homeless, did not passively wait for aid. Instead, they became organizers, housing activists, and powerful political voices. So the spontaneous mutual aid response in Mexico City after the quake represented an alternative economy of care defined by solidarity, emotional connection, and direct action, not by transactions or state control. It underscored institutional failure and the power of collective action. As Solnit puts it, the real disaster began long before the earthquake, just as the utopia of social engagement and community strength lasted long after. So it was the ordinary citizens, not the government-led rescue and resistance. The quake marked the rebirth of what Mexicans call civil society. They became organizers, housing activists, and powerful political voices. So across disasters, people reclaim agency and community, creating what Solnit calls a view into another world where friendship and love counted for a lot, long-term plans and old anxieties for very little. So in these moments, the prevalent human nature in disaster is resilient, resourceful, generous, empathic, and brave, and everyone is equal in the rubble, and the hierarchy of needs becomes a bond of solidarity. So as I wrap up our discussion on transformative of mutual aid, I would like to invite you to take a moment to reflect on these affirmations that I put together that are rooted in this spirit. These affirmations remind us that we are not alone. And as you think of these affirmations, I invite you to reflect on how each one resonates with you. Maybe you can pick one in addition to answering the question for this week. My intention is for us to envision a future where we can meet our needs collectively and imagine new possibilities together. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate your time.